Good morning and welcome back to Time Under Tension. My name is Olivia Gravengard, and I'm coming to you today with an episode that is vulnerable, which I found is the greatest way to connect and to share lessons in a way that doesn't feel like you're being talked at. I've had a habit in my life of giving examples by saying, people in general do this, or we as a society do this. And I think that it's much more powerful for someone to come in and say, hey, here's my crap. Here's what I struggle with. And maybe that doesn't relate to you, or maybe it does, or maybe a piece of it triggers some reflection in your own life that allows you to move forward in a new way. So I think sharing what we learn in life, although it is vulnerable, is the most powerful thing because it allows us to all grow together and to demonstrate that we are, in some ways, although we are on all of our own separate journeys, we are walking this earth at the same time, most of us. And we have an opportunity to come together as a community by growing together and saying, hey, here's what I'm seeing in my life. What are you seeing in yours? And where do those things line up? And where do these lessons continually show up in different ways, but with the same end lesson in mind? I believe that God reveals himself to us throughout our lives. And I also believe that God reveals himself progressively throughout history. And so, for those of us walking this earth at the same time, I find it absolutely fascinating how many people I find on similar journeys of self discovery who are learning very similar lessons at the same time. And I don't think it's a coincidence. I think that it is this progressive revelation of God and our source in our lives. So, something I've been learning lately in my own struggles is setting a sustainable pace. I set a word for every month based on something that I need to work on. And my word for this month has been endure or endurance. I am a sprinter. I can run as fast as you can imagine. Not competitively, but I am pretty fast for a short amount of time. And just like I talked about in my last newsletter, Arenas for Growth, I think that everything that we pursue in life gives us kind of this microcosm that allows us to face certain challenges that we have in our bigger overall life and to develop skills within that arena that, again, we can then transfer into our day-to-day life in more arenas. So, in the same way, I think some of the things that we struggle with, we can see more clearly within one of these microcosms. And then we can start to understand how that pattern also then shows up in other areas of our life. So, an example of this, as far as fitness goes, I am very much a sprinter. I love going fast and hard for a short amount of time, and I can do that all day, and I love it. I enjoy it. It's fun for me. But if you ask me to run a mile plus, I will procrastinate on that. I will postpone it. I will avoid it at all costs. I will find ways to sprint more to make up for the fact that I don't want to do a longer extended form of cardio. This is just how I am. And same with lifting. If you ask me to do 8 to 12 reps, I'm there all day, but you start to push me up to 15, 20 plus reps on an exercise, and I do not like the way that feels. It is almost, I believe the excuse that I would use is that my body is not built for that, that I have certain type of muscle fiber that prevents me from optimizing that kind of movement. Now, I'm at a point in my life where I am learning to face my weaknesses. I have strengths and those are great, and it's fun to lean into those because it's rewarding and you see fast progress, but you don't see a ton of growth truly as a person when you're constantly emphasizing your strengths. I instead like to focus on the things that I know are weak points and really just dive in and deal with the discomfort of knowing it's going to be a long and grueling journey for some of these things. And it's going to be mostly a continual process of pushing forward in the area and then reflecting and coming to terms and being honest with myself about where I'm falling short of where I want to be. And then again, setting myself to the goal and continuing to work on that area, knowing that it's not going to come naturally. So endurance is something that I've struggled with, and it's something that I have really worked to improve in my life, because while it's easy to see how that shows up in the arena of fitness, I started to realize that that's just a small piece of it. That pattern shows up in every area of my life. That when I get into a relationship, whether it's a friend or a romantic relationship, doesn't matter. It's the same thing. I will invest a lot initially. And then if I overcommit time and say, overextend myself in how often I can say text this person or see this person, eventually I'll hit a point of burnout where I will start to drift because I won't have set a pace that I can sustain. And I also see this in my work. In my career as a nurse, I only stayed at each job I was at for a year. So I worked at 3 different hospitals over a course of 3 years. And I don't regret this because I know that I learned a lot at each one, and I really feel like I listened to what God was calling me to do. But as I look back at the pattern, what I could see in my life is that initially I would go into a job very excited, bright-eyed, bushy-tailed, and eager to please, eager to extend myself, absolutely willing to not have a lunch if it meant helping someone out. Definitely willing to go and assist a fellow nurse, even if my patient needed something first in order to help. And even if that put me behind for the day and I was charting late at the end of the day. And then 6 months in, I would start to hit that point of feeling resentment and burnout because I had overextended myself and set a pace that I could not sustain. So seeing this reflected in every area of my life, I've had to really wrestle this month as I've faced this word and what it means and figure out how to improve my endurance. I'm taking on new responsibilities in my life right now. I recently took on a full-time job and will be stepping into like a leadership role at that job, which is extremely exciting. But I still have my own coaching business that is a priority for me. I'm also investing in new relationships and just moved to a new state a couple of months ago, and a lot has changed in my life. And what I figured out more recently, the hard way, as we tend to do, is that I had taken on too much, that I had a sudden burst of energy from some life changes, and that I took advantage of that to the point where I said yes to a lot of things and just started grinding. And it felt great at first because the busyness is invigorating and your body is incredibly adaptive and can sustain a very high output for a given amount of time. But I could start to feel that I was cutting corners on things that are important to me, such as getting enough sleep, that I was not as present in certain activities as I wanted to be because my mind was so busy, and that I was starting to develop a sense of overwhelm and even resentment in some areas because I could tell that my spirit was telling me that I was not balancing rest and recovery with the amount of output that I was trying to sustain. Now, what's challenging about this is life demands a lot, that there are seasons of grinding. Just like when I was in prep, it was a grind and I don't regret it at all. But I pushed myself to my absolute limits, and there's an equal and opposite effect. On the other side of prep, I dealt with this long period, months of trying to bounce back. My body was beat up and my mind was shot as well. And I felt really guilty for that because I thought I should just be able to grind continuously forever. But what I began to realize, and what I realized way more over time, and especially in this current season that I'm in, is that if you expect a high level of output from yourself, you need to understand that there's going to be a backswing on the other side. And so if you're wanting more sustainable progress and not just to be a sprinter where you can grind as hard as you can for 5 minutes or 5 months, and then have to take an equal amount of time to rest and recover, that you should instead find smaller pulses of output on a shorter term basis so that you can sustain the output more continually. And when we look at the earth and the patterns that are naturally ingrained into this world that we live in, we see this pattern. We see that on a daily basis, there are days and nights, and days are meant for work and output and pushing ourselves, and nights are meant for rest and connection and restoration. And that those hours in the day are balanced in order to sustain us for those busy days. And again, it's a pulse. It's just like our hearts. Our hearts are balanced if they are healthy and effective with continual pulses, which are contractions that push blood throughout our body to sustain life, and then expansion to fill with blood in order to prepare for the next pulse. If the heart begins to struggle, if there's some damage to the heart, if our nervous system stress and that affects the heart, we have some kind of arrhythmia, or if we have any kind of condition that would affect the way that this rhythm operates, we start to see an imbalance between the way that the heart contracts and expands, and that affects our life. It affects the amount of energy that we have. It affects our ability to sustain life and to actually thrive. And it's the same in our life. Seasons in the world, we see like there's these warmer seasons of higher output, and then there's these colder seasons of kind of more darkness and reflection. Naturally, these patterns are all around us. And yet, because we attempt to short circuit and overwrite the natural rhythms of the world in order to sustain a high level of output in our driven society that idolizes grinding, we try to convince ourselves, and we use substances to override our natural patterns, and we ignore our body's signaling that it needs rest, and instead idolize the grind and continually push ourselves. And then we shame ourselves if we're not able to sustain this level of output, which is insanity, honestly, if you think about it. And we wonder why our bodies begin to shut down, and we wonder why we develop addictions, and we wonder why we get to midlife and look around at our lives and have no idea what's going on, or why our relationships are dissolving, or why we're at a job we hate, because we've had our head down and we've just been running fearfully for years and years on end without any time to pause and recharge and reflect, and to actually ask ourselves, is this something that I want? How am I feeling? Am I giving myself the resources I need to actually sustain my life? Am I filling so that I can maintain the level of output that is necessary to fulfill my purpose? And the only way to fill is to slow down. And when we operate in these series of expansions and contractions, we move forward continually. And maybe the pace is a little bit slower, but I would argue that it's such a more sustainable pace that will be able to be much more effective and efficient in the amount of work and the quality of work that we put into this world. If we really want to show up full of life, we need to operate like the heart. We need to contract and we need to expand, and we need to balance those two necessary functions, equally important functions, the yin and yang of life, in order to continually move forward. And if one of those is out of balance, we will begin to suffer. If we expand too much in that we take too much time to rest and don't push ourselves to grow, we'll develop a sense of lethargy. We'll begin to feel this fullness and this drowsiness on life. We'll begin to lose our drive to grow. And that's equally a problem. But if we prioritize the contraction continually and live in a contracted state, we're never fully filling. If our heart is continually contracting, it's only pushing out a small amount of blood because it's never opening up to truly fill with its capacity with blood and pulse out to the body. Both of these are equally tragic and lead to lives that are not only unsustainable, and unhealthy, but are unfulfilling. But if instead we learn to contract and to expand with equal amounts of power and to find a balance that works for us, where we push and grind and then rest and recharge and push and grind and rest and recharge, we move forward with these pulsations that allow us to move forward effectively, efficiently, and with purpose throughout our lives. So, in my path, in my self appointed journey this month to learn about endurance, it wasn't what I thought. I thought this is a grind. This is going to be just a continual level of output without much recharge, because that's what I think about when I think about like a marathon, which is, or an Ironman, the ultimate like endurance event. But instead, you have to see life as more of a series of contractions and expansions, and that's where the endurance lies. You have to rest and recover as with as much commitment as you give to pushing and growing and grinding. And I would challenge you to examine the areas of life in which you feel burned out, examine the areas in which you feel overwhelmed, overburdened, under resourced, and ask, where can I incorporate more rest and recharge in my life? Where can I give myself more room to expand and fill so that I can then push and grind and give life to the body more effectively and consistently? And how can I then expand that balance throughout a day, throughout a week, throughout a month, throughout a year, so that I can move forward at a pace that is sustainable and effective and allows me to step into my purpose continuously each and every day and to actually live and thrive in that state. I hope you guys are finding that balance, and I know my journey with it will be a long one. After all, it is about endurance, and I think this is a lifelong journey, and life continually requires rebalancing as we take on new responsibilities. But I think this process of reflecting, this process of learning to expand and contract, regardless of what the external circumstances are, and knowing that the more you take on, the more life you have to sustain, the faster you're beating, faster you're going to have to fill as well. You'll learn how to expand this pattern regardless of what you're taking on in life, regardless of what challenges you're facing, regardless of what burdens you're having to carry at this point in your life, because you're finding a balance with the rest and recharge that is allowing you to show up and shoulder those burdens every single day and face those giants and truly show up to the challenges in your life feeling empowered and refueled to do so. Thank you guys so much for watching and or listening. You can find this on YouTube, Apple, iTunes. Please like it and share it and comment. I love engagement. So if you have questions or if this applies to your life, please feel free to reach out to me. My email is below. You can DM me. You can comment below on YouTube. And don't forget to subscribe and support the channel. I so appreciate you guys for listening. I hope you have a wonderful week and weekend, and I will catch you next time on Time Under Tension.